Hi, thanks for joining me, Steve Hayes from Element, as I give you a quick update on IEC and CISPR updates to standards that have happened in the last year, and also a forward-looking view of what's coming along down the tracks. So, if you're not familiar with the IEC meet once a year for their big plenary meeting, and the IEC covers literally hundreds and hundreds of different standards. I'm going to speak specifically about those that relate to EMC, whether it be EMC emissions or EMC immunity. The IEC meetings this year were held in New Delhi in India in October, and it's where the whole community comes together, and it's probably like the management committees really, if you think of it like that, these plenary meetings where they make sort of high-level decisions and get reports from the different working groups that are subordinate to the management committees themselves. So I wanted to start off and just talk to you about some high-level hot topics, if you like. And when I talk about IEC and CISPR, well, first of all, CISPR is just part of the IEC. CISPR is a special committee to do with protection of radio services, and it sits as part of the IEC itself. Now, one of the issues that we have with EMC standards is currently overlapping scopes. So we have, for example, a standard CISPR 14-1, which covers household products, and within the scope of household products, historically we've had power supplies. So things like a battery charger for your car, for example, or a 12-volt battery charger that you might use at home, but all pretty much household type products. We then have CISPR 11, which is for industrial, scientific and medical equipment, and they also cover power supplies, more for industrial use and applications and those sorts of things. Then in recent times, with the advent of DC powered equipment and USB and things like that, we've also got USB chargers that may or may not be covered by the multimedia emission standard, which is CISPR 32. The problem is that we know which standard to apply because we're in the industry. But if you're a manufacturer of these things, it can get confusing as to, well, should I apply this standard or should I apply that standard? And so we're trying to do some work within CISPR at the moment to make sure that the scopes don't overlap. And the reason why we're doing this work now is because of a thing called Smartification. Smartification is an initiative that was started by the IEC and ISO, and the idea is it's almost like using AI but in the standards world. So as a consumer of standards, you could perhaps type in and say, tell me all of the requirements I need to think about when designing a power supply, and so it would cover safety requirements and the EMC requirements and functional requirements of power supplies. But if you've got multiple EMC standards that all cover power supplies, then the smartification process runs into a problem because it doesn't really know what to apply, which is the right one and what isn't. And therefore the whole thing then starts to sort of unpick itself. And so this initiative from the IEC and ISO on smartification, for us, within the actual standards committees themselves, starts with making sure that our scopes of standards don't overlap. So that's something to watch out for as time goes by, because it may be that your product is covered by multiple standards, and in the future you might need to sort of revisit that in terms of which one to apply. Another issue that we've been talking about in the standards EMC emission standards world is the difference between emissions, what a product emits, and disturbances. So if I look at, for example, CISPR 32, it talks about emissions from multimedia equipment. If I go and look at CISPR 14-1, it refers to it as disturbances from household products. They're both trying to do the same thing, and it's just unifying the terminology. And what we've decided to do is that the word emissions is more ubiquitous in terms of what are we actually trying to do to help the users of the standard understand what the real detail of the document is. So watch out for that. Then in our industry updates, you will often hear us talking about standards or harmonised standards listed in the official journal. And we've talked about for a number of years now about the HAS consultants. So these are people, individuals employed by Senelec or through the European Commission, employed by Senelec to do a review of candidate standards to make sure that they're suitable for demonstrating and getting presumption conformity against the directive in Europe. Well, here I am talking about international IEC standards. So why am I also talking about Europe at the same time? And the answer is that our European standards are derived from the international standards. And this is a big issue within Europe in terms of making sure they're written in a way that technology neutrality, that it doesn't put regulatory hurdles in the way or requirements into the documents themselves. They're just purely test methods and limits that are contained in those documents. And so this agreement between the IEC and Senelec in Europe sees those HAS consultants have an opportunity to feed directly into the international standards before it's too late in the day, where a lot of the requirements are then solidified that then can't be changed at a further moment down the line. And that will then help keep the international standard in step with the European ones. So watch out for that. Another change to the emission standards relates to host equipment that integrates radio modules or functionality within the product, within the host itself. It's a hot topic of debate in the radio world and has been for many years. But from a practical point of view, if you're an EMC lab doing an EMC test on a product and it just happens to have a radio in it, can you just ignore all of the emissions from the radio module itself? Or should you be considering those as part of your test? So it provides some guidance on that topic. Then the other issue is when you put two radio signals that are harmonically related to each other in close proximity, then you will generate intermodulation products. And the question is, should an EMC lab ignore those, or should they assess them against the appropriate limit? Whose fault is it, if you like, for these things that they've occurred? And the answer is, well, it's everybody's and nobody's. And so the idea is, again, in the wording, it will provide information to the user of those standards, how to discriminate between intermod products and those of the host equipment or the radio module, and whether you should eliminate or consider them as part of your compliance assessment. So watch out for that. That's coming along. In terms of some of the other, this is more in the sort of technical details now, and I guess this is almost like an early warning indicator of what's coming down the tracks in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Most of the emission standards that we have at the moment stop at 18 gigahertz. But of course, we're using frequency ranges way above 18 gigahertz now. Even cellular with 5G new radio, the frequency band FR2 is in the sort of 20, 30 gigahertz band. So how can we say, here is an EMC emission standard that helps protect the radio spectrum if we don't cover the full spectrum? And so the idea is that the emission standards will be updated to cover the range 18 to 40 gigahertz. There's a question as to whether it's 40 gigahertz or 43.5, which is the upper part of the 5G FR2 band. But the point is, there are emission requirements coming along down the tracks in the next few years that you as a manufacturer will need to make sure that you comply with. So we're looking at, what do the limits need to be? What does the test equipment need to do? How do you calibrate the test equipment, including the test environment as in the chamber itself, and what type of chamber is suitable? So watch out for that. In terms of other standards, we've got industrial, scientific and medical equipment, and in integrated into that are EMC requirements for electric vehicle chargers. That work has been going on a number of years now, but there's a need to have radiated emissions in the frequency range 150 kilohertz to 30 megahertz. And again, there's work being done there to define the test method and the limits to protect radio services in that particular frequency range from these very high power AC-DC, DC-DC converters at that low frequency. Additionally, in situ testing is something that will be covered in a new CISPR standard, CISPR 37, and there's work that's being done at the moment to write a new standard to cover exactly that environment. At the same time, there's some practical problems that have been identified as a result of doing emission testing on products where you have an isolated neutral supply. So these are renewable type installations, so it might be a ship or a off-grid microgrid or something like that. And there's a danger that test equipment goes into saturation. So we're coming up with a new way of doing the setup to make sure that that doesn't happen and there's no complications there in terms of test equipment. So that's something else that's coming along. In terms of the generic standards, we're defining again, that 18 to 40 gigahertz frequency range work there. There's also talk in the 9 to 150 kilohertz band, introducing requirements for DC power ports and public DC power ports. So again, if you make something that is going to be connected to the low voltage DC network, then you'll find that there's new and emerging requirements coming in for that as well. Multimedia products, so this is CISPR 32. After probably a few years of technical discussions in terms of what is going to be included or excluded from the update from that standard, pleased to report that we now have a committee document that has actually gone out to national committees for vote. So we're optimistic that during perhaps 2026, there'll be a new version of CISPR 32. And that covers new types of technology, new types of products, removes some of the ambiguity which exists in the existing standard. What it won't include is wireless power transfer devices. That's still such a hot topic that couldn't be resolved, so that'll be a hangover until the next version of the standard. But it's a complete technical revision of the standard, so really quite a lot of changes integrated in there that you'll see in due course. On the immunity side, there's work being done on the RF type tests in terms of close proximity RF fields. There's a new basic EMC standard, 4-41. Got published earlier this year in 2025, and it's a test really much higher in frequency than we would typically test to, but it's to simulate the effects of a 5G radio in close proximity to your product. And so it's a broadband test because of the bandwidths and the nature of the modulation that we use for 5G NR. And it's to make sure that your product's going to work okay when exposed to signals from 5G networks and devices themselves. Another update that's coming along is for electrical transients, 61000-4-4. At the moment, or historically, we've used a repetition frequency of 5 kilohertz. And then over a period of time, we actually thought that 100 kilohertz was more representative of what happens in the real world. And as it stands at the moment, the standard says apply 5 or 100 kilohertz. The new draft of the document says and. So clearly that would double the amount of testing that manufacturers have got to do and therefore add cost to testing. But it's one of those things that's in feedback mode from various different national committees at the moment. So we may find that the or statement, the logic or, remains, because I've seen some of the early feedback already, and there's a lot of manufacturers and industry that really doesn't want to
double the amount of testing, because I'm not sure that we see that many failures in the real world as a result of it. So it's just a quick high-level summary of some of the things that have been going on in the IEC plenary meetings this year. Be sure to check back in with our regular updates, and we'll keep you appraised of any other changes that are coming along. So thanks for tuning in, and speak to you soon. Take care.